Tēnā koutou katoa, Eswayal, Mingalaba. Hi everyone, welcome to Human Stories. I'm Keziah Wallis and I'm a Māori social anthropologist. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territory of the Suuma and the Mathwi peoples. So I work on two main themes, I guess you can call them. I study the ways that religion, culture, and gender intersect in the production of connectedness in contemporary Myanmar. And I also explore the ways that we can bring together experiential, feminist, and Indigenous anthropological methodologies to try and come to a decolonised understanding of how communities establish a sense of self-identity and belonging. Basically, all of this is what I call the anthropology of connectedness, the study of how people understand, produce, and find meaning in their relationships with other people, places, histories, ideas, and otherworldly beings. So I'm interested in the ways that religious or cultural worldviews shape how people understand their relationships with others, and in turn, how this affects the ways in which they produce and articulate feelings of belonging and community. We'll come back to the slide in a minute, but we need to take a brief detour so I can just give you a little bit of a background on Buddhism so that you can have a better understanding of our topic for today. So, as I said, I study the ways religion, culture, and gender intersect in the production of connectedness. I conduct my research primarily in the Bago region of Myanmar, which is in the southeast of the country. For security reasons, to protect participants during the ongoing violence in Myanmar, I won't give any further specifics, and any photographs that I share in this presentation will have faces obscured in order to protect participants' safety. The majority of people in the Bago region, and pretty much all of my participants, identify as Bamar, the ethnic majority population, who make up about 40% of the country. Something like 98% of Bamar are Buddhist. So I work with Bamar Buddhists. And for these people, reincarnation is understood as a total fact of life. That's the thing about religion. It permeates so many other aspects of our lives. It shapes the way we understand the world, our values, and our relationships with others. And Buddhists believe that everyone goes through an extended journey across multiple rebirths. They have varying levels of understandings of the complicated nature of this, and you can see that in the two diagrams that I've got on the screen. But what's important for us to recognize is that being human is only one of those levels, and that it's actually part of a longer journey, and you might spend multiple lifetimes as a human, or you might go up and down along this chart. What's really important for our talk today is that for Bamar Buddhists, this is a fundamental fact of life. Every single human alive today is someone reborn. You have to work your way up to human existence, and pretty much every single person who dies is reborn. Enlightenment is really hard to achieve. So when we understand something to be a fundamental fact of life, like, for example, that every person is a separate and unique individual, or that people are reincarnated across different forms, then we often tend to interpret things we encounter as evidence supporting these views. So for Bamar Buddhists, they see evidence of the truth of reincarnation on an almost daily basis. That person you meet and just click with, well, you must have known them and been friends or family in a previous life. The child who looks just like your deceased grandparent and loves the same foods as them, that's probably your grandparent reborn to be part of your family again. The other thing that's really important is the concept of karma. So when you're good, karma when you're a good person, you have good karma, and good karma means you're born into a good life, right? The realm, the form, your gender, your family, all of these things are dependent on your karma. And I'm going to come back to this issue of karma, but just to kind of bear in mind that karma is the thing that determines how your current rebirth plays out. So we have this idea that reincarnation is a total fundamental fact of life, but also another idea which isn't as explicitly described in the Buddhist text, which is the idea that certain groups of people are reborn together again and again. The stories of the Buddha's previous lives, known as the Jataka, tell us that in each of his rebirths, the Buddha was meeting the same people again and again. They shared a journey towards enlightenment. This is going to be important because the topic that I'm going to talk about today is sort of the similar thing. So an approach to the ways people create bonds of relatedness with each other, but also with how they establish ideas of being belonging, is what I call the anthropology of connectedness in Myanmar. So we're thinking about how do people do these things within the context of a Buddhist world that sees reincarnation as a fundamental fact of life. The people I met in Myanmar didn't seem to have the same difficulties that people in the West sometimes have with understanding close relationships with those outside their biological family. They had within their cultural toolkit a concept that they could deploy to describe the feelings of connectedness they felt with others. This concept emerges out of those Buddhist ideas I talked about reincarnation and karma, and it shapes the way that they understand their relationships with the people and places they inhabit. In Burmese, this concept is called Yizet. Yizet is basically the bonds of karma that connect people across rebirths. And it's this concept that I'm going to talk to you about today. It's used by Bamar Buddhists to explain those momentary meetings in which feelings of deep connectedness are born. My Bamar friends would explain that our emotional attachments to each other were the result of Yizet, but also that our very meetings were because of Yizet. These connections of karma bring people together again and again across each new life. And gradually, over the course of my time in Myanmar, I became aware of how Yizet served as the foundation of all forms of connectedness within Bamar Buddhist life. Now, Yizet is made through a ritual called Yizet Cha, which basically means to make Yizet. The Yizet Cha takes place at the end of any merit-making ceremony. And merit making is the cornerstone of Bamar Buddhist practice. Making merit is how you improve your karma, and good karma means you'll have a better rebirth in your next life. So how do you make merit? Well, there's a huge range of activities, but basically making merit means doing good deeds, building a pagoda, feeding monks, making donations to a monastery, or even to an orphanage or hospital. In the village where I did the majority of my fieldwork, the most common way of making merit is a ritual called Sandwe, where people would invite monks from the monastery to their homes for a meal. They would invite their friends and family to come. The monks would preach to the group of people, reciting passages from the Buddhist texts. And after the monks had finished preaching, the merit that had been earned by the family who had sponsored the event would be shared with everyone present in the Yizet Cha. The donors would carefully pour water drop by drop from a pot or a glass into a bowl, like you can see in this image from the pre-coup government, while the entire congregation would recite in unison 3 prayers. Now, the first asked for forgiveness for any wrongdoing and paid homage to the Buddha. The second is what we might call an affirmation of faith. They would take refuge in the triple gems of Buddhism, the Buddha, his teachings, and the order of monks. But the third, which is called the Amiya way, was where everyone chanted in unison that they were sharing the merit of the event with each other. And the sharing of merit here produces these bonds of karma that connect these people together. The Yizet Cha produces Yizet. Pouring water together in the Yizet Cha makes Yizet, and Yizet brings people back together again and again, like strings of karma that join people in a web. The more you do Yizet Cha, the stronger the Yizet, and the more likely you'll encounter those people again. So what does this all mean? Well, it means a lot. I wrote about 80,000 words on it after all. But basically, we can sum this up into 4 main findings that are really about the metaphysical, the social, the affective, and the political dimensions of Yizet. And I'll go through each of these in turn. So let's start with that metaphysical idea that Yizet serves as an explanation for biological connections. Part of my research involved interviewing people who either remembered their past lives or had children who were identified as specific relatives reincarnated. This isn't as common as we might think, even though most people are, well, every person is understood to be reincarnated. Most people don't know who they're reincarnated from. And I was interested in what happens to kinship relationships when previous reincarnations are known. And so I spent a lot of time interviewing people. And Ma Tintin was one of the women I interviewed. She'd nursed her father-in-law through a long struggle with terminal cancer, and her daughter was understood by the family to be the reincarnation of her deceased father-in-law. And in the excerpt from my conversation with Ma Tintin on the screen, she's explaining to me how her father-in-law came to be reborn as her daughter. Tintin and U Mint had spent a lot of time making merit together. He was the father of her husband, after all. The outcome of this shared merit making was that Ma Tintin and U Mint had fairly strong bonds of karma between them, Yizet that had accrued through all the Yizet Cha they had done together. This Yizet and the bonds of affection that Umint and Martinta had meant that after his death, Umint didn't want to leave his family. So the bonds of karma that they had drew him back to Martintin at the moment when she was pregnant so that he could be reborn as her daughter, his granddaughter. So the reason why I say Yizet is used as an explanation for biological connections is that what's going on here is Martintin is explaining why her daughter is her daughter, but she's explaining it in a way that explains why a non-biological relationship, her father's husband, becomes a biological one, her daughter. She's not necessarily thinking of it in these terms herself, but as an anthropologist, we can interpret it in this way. So the Yizet between Umint and Martintin brings them together and produces a biological relationship between them. The classical anthropology approach to kinship would see biology and marriage as the drivers of kinship. But what this shows us is that actually these are outcomes, products of karmic connections. Your family is your family because of karma. The people who are born into your family are born into it because you have Yizet with them. Because in a previous life, you've made merit with them, you've built bonds of karma together, and these bonds have brought you back together and led to the biological connections that you have in this life. This also connects the idea that Yizet is the foundation of the family. It's an extension of that idea that I've just talked about. But here I'm thinking more about how we can move away from those biological notions entirely. And I do this through looking at this particular term, ako. It's a term of address that's used to refer to an elder brother or an elder male cousin. It's also used by wives to address their husbands. It's used to address the husbands of your elder sisters, but also the elder brothers of your husbands. And these are not corresponding biological relationships. Now, there are individual kinship terms that refer to those relationships, but the term that you use to address those people is the same. It's this ako. So what we have is this term that's used to refer to a whole bunch of different relationships. And in this sense, ako has a whole range of different relationships going on, but we can see a common thread between them, which is this kind of public relationship of reciprocal obligations that people have, right? There's certain levels of respect that are owed to your ako, and there's certain levels of care and duty that an ako has to the people who address him as that. So this is what I mean in terms of thinking about kinship beyond biology, right? It becomes a little clearer when we look at the process through which friends become family. So during my fieldwork, I became very close to a woman that I'm going to call Misan. And as a result of our close relationship, I became adopted into Misan's family. My kinship relationships within that family are a result of this adoption. Her elder sisters are my elder sisters. And in fact, my elder sister's husband is referred to as my ako, even though he's younger than me, because my relationship to him is determined through my relationship to my sister. And this is where we find in Burmese, there's no distinction between in-laws and biological siblings. Your brother is your brother. The difference is that that in-law relationship can be severed through divorce or death, whereas the biological relationship doesn't tend to be, but there's no real distinction between it. And the reason for this, or at least my interpretation of the reason for this, is that there's a kind of underlying element of karma. Your brother-in-law has become your brother-in-law because of karma, but so is your brother, right? And so we're referring to this sort of karmic idea of kinship that's going on. And this becomes really clear when it comes to what I call the optative dimension of kinship. So if it's a divorce, usually that kinship relationship is severed. But if, say, for instance, your sister dies, your family has an option to decide whether they want to sever that kinship relationship with your brother-in-law. He may remain your brother, even though you're no longer connected through your sister. But if you don't like him, you can cut that relationship and he's no longer related to you, right? And so there's a certain level of choice in terms of how non-biological relationships are expressed and maintained. And so if we recognize that karma produces biological relationships and these relationships extend across multiple rebirths, then we can see how this is not that different from calling a biological sibling a ko to calling a non-biological sibling or even a close friend. So what you tend to find is that this is related to making merit. So in the photograph on the screen, this is me standing alongside a young boy that I temporarily adopted. And this was part of a merit-making ceremony called a novitiation. And so what happens in terms of this optative dimension is that this young boy and his mother have decided to continue that relationship. So I temporarily adopted him. They've chosen to continue that relationship beyond the boundaries of the ceremony. And I've chosen to respond to that. And we do that through continuing to make merit together. So when I go back to the village, we do more merit making together. And this is what I mean about articulating kinship as being about kin making. So kin making takes place in Myanmar through merit making. When you make merit with people, you're building yizet. The more you make merit with someone, the stronger that yizet. And most merit making is done on the basis of the household. And these are kind of at larger events, but also the household makes merit as a group on a daily basis. You build bonds of yizet. The people in your household tend to be biological and marital relations, but they don't have to be. And in a sense, it's a coincidence that they're biological and marital. It's not anything more than the fact that you live together and make merit together on a daily basis that makes your family, because family isn't limited to this lifetime. Which brings me to the third finding for today, which is this idea that yizet's an expression of affection and a desire for future connections. When you say I have yizet with you or with someone else, you're implying some kind of ongoing relationship that's extended across rebirths. You're saying that in the past we were close enough that we made merit together, and that's why we've encountered each other today. If you choose to build yizet with someone, you're saying, I like you enough that I want to see you again. Right? The more you engage in merit making with someone, the more you're expressing a feeling of affection for them. You're saying, I like you so much that I want us to be together in future rebirths. This is what I call the affective or the emotional component of yizet. It's a way of saying I like you without necessarily saying I like you. But this isn't always a straight out emotional thing. It can have what we might think of as a political expression, in the sense that there are motivations that undergird the people that you choose to make merit with. This is most clearly articulated in what I call Dana cliques. Dana is the Burmese term for merit making. So a Dana clique is a group of people who are associated around a business interest. So for example, someone might own a medical clinic, another person might manufacture pharmaceuticals, another person might make medical equipment. So they're in associated fields. They're not in competition with each other. They make merit together and they work together. They sell their goods to each other. They connect to each other in a business sense. In making merit together, they're building bonds of yizet. And what that does is says we're like kin, or we're potential kin. And if I make merit with you, then we like each other enough that we want to be kin in the future. So we can trust each other. There's a level of trust that comes that isn't necessarily present in other relationships. And if I can trust you because we have yizet, then I can trust you in my business dealings. I know that our businesses, our lives are things that are going to continue across rebirths. And that's the kind of sense of what I'm getting at here in terms of this desire for future connections. All of this comes together in our final finding for today, which is yizet as community or as belonging, right? So these large ceremonies like the novitiation ceremony produce larger amounts of merit. And they tend to be the most important merit-making ceremonies, and they involve lots of different people, often the entire village. And so what we find is these large community level events are the most important. They're the ones that everyone tends to return to the village if they've gone elsewhere in order to participate in. And so what happens is you tend to have processions like the one in this photograph, which also map the spatial dimensions of the village, but are about every single household in the village being represented in the merit making. So what's happening is these young women in this procession are building yizet between the various households. And this is a kind of expression of community membership. It shows us who is a member of the village, who lives in the village, who belongs to the village, and who feels that they belong to the village if they don't live in it anymore. Some may have moved to the city. By looking at who is in these processions, we can see who feels that they are a member of the village. And at the same time, it's kind of coming into this political dimension in terms of a statement of allegiance. You make a decision to hold a ritual like this in a specific space. And in doing so, you're saying, I feel a sense of solidarity. I feel a sense of belonging to this particular place. So The community, by having a ritual there, you're saying the community I want to build Yizet with is this one, right? The strongest Yizet are the biggest and most important rituals. You're saying, this is my community, these are my people. And this is what happens when these big, large village level ceremonies. And this often gets articulated when newcomers move into the village. It becomes a sense of they've come back because of Yizet, right? But they have to maintain that through regular merit making with the village in these large scale events. So what does this tell us about people today? What does it tell us more generally? Because I've talked a lot about the real specifics of Myanmar, but actually this tells us a lot about the world in general. It tells us that biology isn't always the driving factor in ideas of who is and who is not family. There's cultural interpretations that underpin these kinds of categories. It also tells us that religious concepts shape much of our understanding of what is natural. Ideas of reincarnation fundamentally shift our understandings of who we are and how we relate to the world around us. We can't separate these religious ideas from the cultural practices that inform them and are informed by them. They're so intertwined. You can't have Yizet without reincarnation, so you can't have Burmese ideas of kinship without Buddhism. It also tells us that ideas of kinship and family actually shade into multiple other aspects of society: gender, politics, community, belonging. These are all really deeply tied into the ideas that we have about who is family and who is not. What does it mean to say someone is family? What does that actually imply? And so we can start to realize that this idea about kinship, ideas about family, religion, and culture influence many different things, and perhaps we can take a deeper look at our own cultures. So that's me, whirlwind tour of Yizet. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check out the blog for more human stories, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the great posts.
Peace and light to you and yours. So I sometimes do this and do that.